I was honored, flattered that Charles asked me to design the program that could be implemented in Indiana, and he was very supportive of the concepts that we had for what it takes to build a foundation, one that it was long-term support, and both Struck and I said at the time of our first conversation, don't start down this and think you can do it in 3 years. And so they heard that very well and understood, and it was a pretty straightforward plan of helping to either launch or grow community foundations. We had the Indianapolis Foundation that was started in, I think, 1915, and it had $50 million of unrestricted money. So it was not a typical model, no living donors. And so they had a couple or 3, 4 probably other more typical community foundations around the state, but again, not well known. Endowment's philosophy was that they were not going to prescribe where community foundations should be. It had to be something that the people wanted, because I had made the point that I didn't think you could cause a community to have a community foundation, and you also could not prevent a community from having a community foundation. The plan was that, and we did some, sharp pencil number crunching, that we would, if we were terribly successful, be able to get about 20 good, healthy community foundations going in Indiana over a 15-year period. Now, they didn't make a financial commitment for 15 years, but they clearly had the understanding that there was long-term commitment there. The program design was pretty simple. It was really a strategy that said, if you're interested in having a community foundation, contact us. We'll provide some first steps of guidance. And if you go through those, then we'll provide second steps and third steps. So there were 4 or 5 people who lived in Indiana. I still lived and intended to stay in California. So there was a team that was put together of volunteers who would go out and talk to people, as would I, because I started in 1990 going to Indiana for 1 week out of the month to help with this project. And we would just meet in church basements or whatever and tell people what a community foundation was and what their requirements were. And their requirements were pretty straightforward. They had to form a corporation. They had to get a board of directors. They had to get a paid staff person, could be an administrator, could be an ED. There was no requirement for whether they had to be full-time, but they had to be at least part-time and paid. And they had to have an office space somewhere. Couldn't operate out of somebody's home. Could be shared space, which most of them were to begin, and a phone that was in their name. So when somebody called, it wasn't, this is the United Way and I'll transfer you. It was the Community Foundation. If they went through those steps, then they were prepared to submit an application, and the funds were made available to provide challenge grants for building endowments, and they could pick the amount. I think the minimum grant was to be $500,000 and the maximum was to be $2.5 million, because our thinking was if we could get foundations to $5 million, now remember this was 1990, that would be a pretty significant foundation in much of Indiana, most of Indiana. So there was challenge grant money for building endowments. There was challenge grant money for operating. You could submit your operating budget, and the endowment would give you 1/3 of it if you raised the other 2/3 of it. And then there was a little bit, really $10,000, kind of a token amount of money available for re-granting, because it was clear that the foundation was talking about being a grant-making foundation, and most of those counties in Indiana didn't have other grant-making foundations, so they needed a little money to have something to demonstrate what they do. They had to, go through a certain steps and then call for more help if they wanted it. And in most cases, they did that and followed through. But in some cases, people couldn't put a board together or didn't have the passion or the excitement or whatever. But the fact was that while we had initially thought 20 foundations would be, huge success, they had 20 active starts within 6 months of the launch of the first announcement. That led us to believe that, there was much more interest and potential around the state. And that was phase one of the GIFT initiative, GIFT standing for Giving Indiana Funds for Tomorrow. And there were 4 subsequent phases of that initiative over about a 10-year period. They continue to support the technical assistance aspect of it now, 22 years later.